All right, we're live. So this is episode 3 of StriderTalk. I'm Matt C, and I'm hanging out with my friend John Matos.
Hello, everyone.
And we're going to be having a fun time tonight, I think.
Trying to find my notes. I have my water,
Mm-hmm.
my bubbly lemon LaCroix. But
Of course. I've got peach pear in front of me.
ooh,
It's a new one, I
sounds
think.
good.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so when we just, so you just got back from a conference.
Yes,
And it sounds
Evil
like there's a lot
Expo.
on your mind. Yeah.
Haha. Yes. So the interesting experiment was to see whether a goth convention would be interested in modern Gothic literature. Being that my novel Cain and Abel, um, I've since changed the description on the back to say that Dennis Cain meets God, the girl of his dreams, and the king of his high school. Um, and that kind of discussion seemed like people really responded to it, but it didn't seem like the type of convention that warranted a lot of um, impulse buying of the art.
Yeah.
And so word seemed to be that like people were really enjoying the convention, but in terms of sales, it wasn't the best. Um,
Mm.
and it made for an interesting time because everyone seemed to be really fellowshipping on a good level. There wasn't any drama or cliquishness or anything like that.
Mm.
Um, but the um, the business side of it is kind of an ongoing thing because I handed out, uh, a lot of cards and
Sure.
the all those types of assessing those things might take a little bit to do.
Yeah,
Um,
of course.
but yeah, it was a fun time. I had recently gone on a Cuba vacation, and because of my muscle weakness, I was kind of like super exhausted by the time I got on the plane and got off the plane and back home.
Wait,
Um,
to Cuba, you said?
oh yes, right before the
Oh, neat.
recent ban or blockade that was reset.
Oh,
We were
wow.
actually the last ship out.
Oh,
um,
cool.
yeah. um,
Bittersweet.
yes, totally. So uh, because of that kind of like exhaustion that I went through,
Yeah.
I thought it might be like untenable um, in terms of like I was really trying to regulate myself. Shout out to SG Willoughby, a Christian author who has uh, a conference that actually also took place this weekend called Diamonds, um, where
Cool.
she was challenging people to uh, basically reverse engineer the verse where Christ says to treat others as you would treat yourself, to show that Christ
Hmm.
also wants us to treat ourselves in a certain type of way.
Hmm.
Um, and it was an interesting thought experiment, considering I was going into this weekend already knowing that I have the tendency to overextend myself sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
so I think it really benefited me a lot to hear her encouraging words to those of us who are interested in creative pursuits and don't
Sure.
always live on the same schedule. Um, and also are trying to uh, work out like conditioning ourselves to what we can actually handle. Um, so it was a lot of different thought experiments happening over the same weekend, and it seemed like I learned a lot personally.
Yeah. It seems like, I mean, some conferences, you get more um, on the back, I guess, like from the other people who are actually tabling and discussing.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you get more from selling content.
Mm.
But
Right.
it
And yeah, and it
depends.
seemed like getting to know people and talking about what the sales were like was, and just basically like seeing what they felt about the convention was really, uh, you know, um,
Yeah.
edifying and interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you get a sense? This is my other big question for you. Did you get a sense of any kind of sea changes or kind of evolution of um, comic conventions, or I mean, just storytelling literature conventions over the past few
Well,
years? People talk
it's
about,
interesting
yeah,
that you kind of named this comic because my friend Jason is kind of inventing his own visual language. I would say he's joined us on our Strider experiment here
yeah,
by adding some of his monsters to um, the designs that go on our Strider. Envy. I keep wanting to say Envy because there's a site called Store Envy.
yeah,
Etsy. He's on our Etsy store. But anyway, he is gearing up to put his own comic out. There was
nice.
somebody to our left who was selling a short story collection, but that was a superhero, supervillain pub where the heroes and villains commiserate with each other about the fight against and the fights against each other that they get into. And then on our right was a comic creator who has a fairy hunter series. So I did,
Wow.
interestingly enough, see some comics, arts, and all different types of shades and sizes.
I guess that's
But
kind of encouraging in a way. I don't know how desperate we all are, or just how opportunistic and I guess like clever we all are. But it sounds like a lot of people are going to all kinds of these kind of shows. You know, like
right, right.
there's no like, oh, that doesn't seem like quite my thing, so I'm just gonna err on the side of not going. It doesn't sound like people creators are doing that, which I think is
Mhm.
smart.
Right. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, and it seemed like they both did. Excuse me. Did varying amounts of sales and
yeah,
that people didn't kind of like look at their selling their stuff, even though the majority of other tables had more in terms of like one person was selling David Bowie coasters and
oh yeah,
another there was a like kind of T-shirt steel cage on the other side of the room. Somebody was selling who's the cover artist for Conan? Um,
oh
I'm drawing a
gosh, I
blank.
was just looking at them a few days ago. I
Uh,
mean, other than Frazetta.
no, for yeah, somebody was
Yeah,
selling Frazettas, um,
yeah,
and
nice.
at the at adjacent wall, nobody was really seemed like to turn their nose up at a comic seller at this con, and so
Yeah,
it was cool to see people like uh, at least giving different tables to time of day and that type of thing.
nice. Yeah, that's encouraging.
Mm.
Hmm.
So how was your week in the creative mind?
I guess pretty good. I got back into drawing pages and kind of locked down some details on. So there's a so the thing that I'm doing, it's
Mhm.
kind of a art collective kind of seminar night.
Mhm.
It's called Opus Inside. Opus is the kind of arts community festival thing that happens in Tampa once a year. And
Okay.
Opus Inside is like when they invite creatives to come and give a talk. So that's what I'll be doing. So I'm
Oh,
looking
okay.
forward to that. And that's a
Cool.
very different scene. I'm
Mhm.
I'm going to be curious to see how well they like. I mean, one of the people that runs it has been trying to get me to go for a couple years now. So I'm
Mhm.
guessing she knows that people would like this, but normally it's like printmakers and people that do fine art and stuff.
Uh-huh.
It's very it's funny because I was in the previous iteration of this when I lived in Tampa. I
Mm.
forgot what we even called it. It was like 10 years ago. But we kind of built like an artist community and it evolved into Opus, which is cool. But about the same time it was evolving into that, I was evolving out of thinking like an artist, thinking like a I don't know, trying to be a philosopher with art, and um, yeah, for better or
I
for
think
worse.
it's apropos that you bring up the term evolve, as we're going to be talking about Jordan Peterson,
Yeah,
and my
you like that
uh,
segue?
my uh, I've kind of been using this taxonomy with Melissa on our show, Unboxing Story.
Hmm.
The kind of like how you can uh, kind of, what would you call it, like fetishize certain people's um,
Hmm.
philosophy and their kind of
Hmm.
uh, you know, language arts that they're building, their rhetoric, and also
Sure.
kind of like be frightened and have a kind of disgust at other things. And that's kind of what has grown in my relationship with Jordan Peterson's thinking.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting. Yeah.
so I'm interested to kind of hash that out
Yeah. Let's
a little
jump right
bit.
in. That'll be. I mean, I'd love to hear your take on it.
Well, so I'm glad you sent me the video that you sent me earlier.
Yeah.
What was the name of the host?
Oh gosh, I don't remember the name of the host. It was at some university, but the other guy was Sir Roger Scruton, who died just a couple weeks ago. Um,
Oh, really? I didn't know. I didn't know it was that recent.
yeah, yeah. So he's coming up in my feed a lot. I looked up, a couple documentaries of his, and then suddenly that's all YouTube shows me. So,
Mm.
um,
Uh,
and
it's interesting because of how I personally I felt was brought up with the sense of kind of like uh, a lot of entertainers in general were people that I had a sense of hero worship for. So it's
oh,
always a very odd feeling when those people pass away, like last year with Stanley.
hmm.
I kind of went through this odd, uh, you know, emotional roller coaster where it's like
Oh, no
you
kidding.
don't know this guy personally, so like there's this kind of thing where you find out how much something has meant to you in some way when that person passes away, um,
Hmm.
and you're kind of wrestling with that a little bit, but
Yeah.
but I was gonna look up considering neither of us know the name of the host. He was on the Discover page on my ThinkSpot um,
Oh.
account. Um, he has a show. Oh, here it is. So Mike Nana was the host of. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. So Stephen Blackwood was the host of that talk that you sent
Okay.
me.
Yeah.
Um, and as I was listening to it, um, it reminded me of how I had kind of um, been introduced to the transcendent through my Eastern philosophy class. Um,
Hmm.
and as an idea, uh, it was always something that from the romantic tradition onward, um, kind of, I was always interested in it. Um,
Yeah.
and what the kind of notes that I took on this, the kind of conclusion that I came to was that it's interesting that Peterson venerates the transcendent as a comforting anecdote to chaos.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I feel like there's a portion of this that mirrors Edwards' theodicy of our ability to witness beauty.
Hmm.
Uh,
Jonathan
and
Edwards.
yes,
Oh,
uh,
nice.
and uh, I the 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 thing that makes this real in my mind is the movie Signs.
Hmm.
Being a native Philadelphian, M. Night Shyamalan is another one of those figures that
Oh, sure.
I wrestle with. Um, and in that movie, Mel Gibson's character is dealing with the death of his wife in a seemingly arbitrary car accident. And there's this push and pull of faith, which Shyamalan uses um, this kind of Deus Ex Machina um, uh, thing where his brother keeps saying this kind of nonsense phrase in his sleep, um, and it's something that his wife actually also said to him before she died, in kind of the word salad that she was going through, and it was like "swing away, Johnny," or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And then it turns out that that's what saves them all at the end, because Johnny has this baseball bat and he had quit baseball because of his grief, and his daughter has been leaving these glasses around, and that's what smacking these glasses at the monsters in that movie are what saves the family.
Yeah. And you find transcendence in that particular twist, I guess.
Well, there's this idea, like
serendipity
within my worldview, that beauty is something that Mel Gibson's character wasn't able to see in the dark place that he was in. And
yeah,
at the same time, my worry is that if this type of thinking is divorced from Christ, there's this idea that the eye of the illuminated will be like the only kind of like totem that we can take with.
You're going deep. You're taking it home today. Yeah.
I wanted to kind of summarize all of the struggles that I've been having in this kind of like little bit. And it kind of comes home to me with the devotions that I went through today, because it was on the tabernacle, and how Moses they built this place for God to dwell, and I think it's interesting because Peterson deals with a lot of this totemistic monomyth type of thinking, and it's interesting to me that God is someone that is outside of our comprehension, and yet chooses to dwell with us. And if you're a Christian, he dwells inside of you. And there are ways in which we could never describe this, and yet there are also many plurality of ways that you can describe it. And those types of things are often frustrating for especially an artist to try to put into words that are accessible to others. But that, I feel like the only real problem that you would come across is if that type of clarity becomes something that leads you away from that illumination.
Which I tend to wonder. I think that there's something in the Jungian kind of early modern psychology movement that appealed very much in Jung's day, and for the same reasons appeals today in Jordan Peterson. That it actually, because you can see, it's so funny to see this the philosopher and the psychologist in the same room trying to have the same discussion, and continually, I think, talking past one another in different ways, because I think if you're going to try and discuss something like the transcendent on a like an early modern psychological level, I think the best you're going to be able to do is to there appeals to, there's many ways to appeal to, like, taking the transcendent and bringing it down to people, like in a Promethean fire kind of way that actually kind of makes it no longer transcendent, but allows you to, I guess, take, I don't know, it's like it's taking the motto myth and then making it useful so that you can clean your room and stuff like this. But I don't think, I worry, and I think this is maybe one reason why he blew up so much, and is also kind of a lot of his fans have kind of dispersed amongst many newer groups now, is that he like a Jungian. I don't see him doing anything more than what the great like the best of Nietzsche and the best of Jung were doing. And I don't even know if he would say. I feel like he would be comfortable saying that. You know, he's just standing on the shoulders of giants in a way. But
Right.
I don't see him. He can see like at the very beginning. I'll say this, and then I'll let you take over. Like right at the beginning, Roger Scruton, who struggled to believe, like as a philosopher, was at first saw Christianity to be useful, and then he found it to be true in ways. I think it was in his 70s, is the last few years of his life, that he really started to argue as if it was true and not just psychologically useful. Being like a Burkean British, like a philosophical conservative, he was interested in conserving things almost for their own sake because it's part of British culture, which I've never understood. But and he felt like Christendom had something useful to say, and I feel like he was arguing from that perspective, which is inane and hollow as far as I'm concerned. But he ended up like, and you see it right at the beginning. He starts saying like that there's a truth that Kant even recognized. Kant is always, people point to Kant like he's the beginning of the problem, and maybe he was, but Kant knew that truth goes farther than our perceptions, and there's a lot of ways to measure that fact. But you at some point you have to walk up to the cliff's edge and know that there's something beyond that cliff that will give you sure footing, you know. And I think Roger Scruton did find that, and I think Jordan Peterson's merely psychological approach doesn't permit it, you know. He finds many ways to discuss that, his own frank and honest and refreshing frustrations with that, which is one of the many appeals. One of the things I like about him is that he'll never hide what he's thinking. You know what I mean?
And I think that there's something in his character that seemed to escape my repertoire as a person trying to talk about big ideas and getting easily frustrated in that pursuit. And so I put here confession time. Because I was easily persuaded by the intellectual dark web as a group to understand the influence and wealth of others to be an affront. This is something that David, as a psalmist, constantly goes through, where he's wondering why there are people that are celebrating evil that seem to be doing well for themselves, and isn't in his own psyche able to reconcile easily in those moments what's going on. But I feel like recently I was given the grace to understand something that Lewis had brought to my attention before in the Screwtape Letters, but I hadn't adequately clung to. He talks about the madness of Acrasia, and I feel like the more we invest our value structure in seeing flesh and blood people as our enemies, the easier demons can convince us that godliness without contentment is possible. Because the idea that you are an adequate reference for what God is trying to do means that when you come across things that are outside of your definition of what should be happening, then you're thinking of reality as crazy, not you as crazy. And it's an interesting idea because I feel like it's what I kind of brought up before when we did the C.S. Lewis episode on Unboxing Story, that there's such a sense of punk rock aspect to C.S. Lewis's writing that was challenging Victorian thinking. And he was trying to kind of get across this idea, like, just because you have security in you're actually too satisfied in what
Yeah.
you're venerating at this current time.
Yeah.
If you're choosing to cling to anything but Christ.
Yeah. 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 And I think, and it's one other thing, I guess, about Jordan Peterson is that he can, I guess, like we're at this time where culture is decentralizing
Mm-hmm.
uh, successfully enough that there's a lot of appeals to, and you see it on his enemy side, you see it on his supporter side, dark website. It's on all sides. Like people are trying to figure out in a age of insecurity, how can we uh, establish a new secure platform? And are there ways? And generally, what you do, I guess, is you look backwards to find, well, what's worked in the past. I guess, when did culture seem like it had a better foundation, and maybe we can um, reestablish that by asserting. It's almost in a Foucaultian. It's almost like it gives the trophy to Foucault. I've been looking at Foucault a lot lately, with his hierarchies of power structure, and everything is power, truth is power, all this stuff. I think it's because a lot of the all of the intellectual dark web guys aren't philosophers. I think they struggle to have a reasonable argument other than making assertions, like many of which I like free speech is about defending um, people's right to disagree with you, or something, like just coming up with aphorisms that are appropriate and truth honoring,
I
but
think you're nailing something on the head.
but they can't prove, someone else that'll be their Foucaultian power statement that they're trying to impose on other people, and other people are going to have their power statements, about how truth is violence, or I mean, your truth is violence, and I mean, I don't think they're waking people up to reading more and thinking more clearly and understanding what arguments work and what is just emotional appeals, but they've yet to figure out what a philosophical approach would be to actually proving their beliefs over others. It's still just politics. It's still just a game of, well, we have free speech, or and I feel like that's still losing ground. That's still using arguments from the 90s or the 80s, back when things were more peaceful. So people say, even though I don't think it was that peaceful then. It's just that the internet's magnified it. But that's kind of my sense of it, because I used to watch a lot of those guys too. I was a big like Dave Rubin fan and all this. But then it just kind of turned into, as it always does, just kind of like drama fests, and it's not a movement that goes anywhere after you've changed your mind on free speech or something. It's something that just is my statement versus yours on the internet. So
Yeah, and I feel that the interesting state that um, I find myself in, as like in accordance with kind of what the psalmist often states about, being in this kind of like long dark of the soul, um, that you get into after some kind of change of mind that you've had, or some type of thing. There's this kind of hollowness that Lewis often talks about with the like with things like Until We Have Faces,
oh yeah,
or The Abolition of Man.
yeah,
There's this kind of like thing that you can define as what you want to be behind all of the knowledge that the world has to offer.
yeah,
And he chooses to believe that there has to be a true myth that is behind all of the kind of powers that exist both in this world and in another that is unlike ours. Um, so
yeah,
I think that kind of goes, oddly enough, into our own kind of um, efforts to return to a kind of philosophical conversation, but through fiction. And it's interesting that there doesn't seem to be, rather, I should say, it seems to be surprising to people that fiction can be a place that your mind is expanded. Um,
Yeah.
and so it's one reason why I'm interested in ThinkSpot, because it does, as I'm looking at the beta that I was just accepted into,
Yeah.
um, the interesting aspect of it seems to be that it's kind of designed like an academic journal, in such a way as you can publish an ebook and people can cite what you've written.
Oh, neat.
But uh, interestingly enough, there is not just um, essay writing on it.
Yeah.
And as some who are or have been a part of academic publications might be aware, usually that type of uh, rigor, in at least my experience, has been attributed to that type of analyses, um, and the like. Um, I'm interested to see that type of functionality as somebody that is trying to
Yeah.
write more philosophically,
Yeah.
um, and,
Yeah.
and also as somebody that keeps trying to just blog like a paragraph essay and then ends up writing like at least 20 plus paragraphs and kind of
Yeah.
the reverse pyramid of like traditional journalist education. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to kind of see how that pans out and what's being brought onto there. But
Yeah.
having just read Kyrie, I was actually I was bragging on you a little bit to my friend Jason, who I went to Evo Expo with this past weekend, and I really liked the uh, your ability to have interesting um, monologues that were not distracting from the story, in the sense that there are a lot of writers that can realize that they have a tool in their bag, and then they're so taken by it that they just kind of keep bringing out the screwdriver when a hammer will do the trick. So I'm interested that it that was something that you were able to achieve, and that I got all of that philosophical weight without there needing to be Shakespearean language all throughout the work.
Oh, thank you. Do you ever? There's a TV show that I stole that from, actually.
Oh,
It's called, or that approach at least. It's called Inspector Morse. They now have a younger version, him in the '60s, called Endeavor,
okay.
and Inspector Lewis did it too. It was like this long-running British detective show in Oxford, and it's very indulgent. But they always had a kind of a oh gosh, I feel like such an idiot. Okay, so at the beginning of an opera, they play like a is it soliloquy, or what's the term? They give you like an overview of the themes that you're going to hear before the curtain raises. Overture.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So it's they would always do that in that show, where they'd give you these snippets of they'd play. This guy was into opera, so they would play something that felt thematically relevant to what the sort of mood and tone that the story was going to take you through, and then they'd give you like a collage of shots interspersed, like cut between that. Like they wouldn't do the opening credits over video; they would cut between credits on a black title card and shots, and it just felt like this interesting kind of juxtaposition where they're intentionally trying to set up like they would show you most of the people you were going to meet. They were showing you snippets of background that you couldn't really understand until later. Uh, context clues, that sort of thing. And it was an overture for the episode. So I was like, how can you do that in comics? And I figured my guess was you could pick something from that time period, like the Shepherd of Hermas, the second century kind of uh, early monastic text, or something from a hymn to the sun from an ancient Egyptian text, or a speech about Alexander the Great, and you can kind of thematically kind of give a sense of mood, I guess. And it doesn't have to make sense, but it just kind of textures things so that you can focus on action, or you can focus on the what's actually happening in the scene, or you can kind of see, oh, this is kind of like I don't know. I think it confused some people, so I'm glad that it didn't.
But I think that not to actually expand on what you're saying, the idea that
No, please.
That Lewis also brings up in Abolition of Man, where he's saying that the criticism that you kind of attribute to Foucault has made the criticism of power something that deprecates, often deprecates the assertion of knowledge. So something like being able to use something that you've appropriated as something that widens someone's knowledge base is actually a way of making a commentary on this can actually open you up to what I'm about to serve you, not limit yourself to some kind of esoteric mindset. And that was kind of what I got from it, that when you were delivering some kind of thing, it was to make the mood open for all the good vibes that you were trying to put in. It wasn't a static, limiting, self-indulgent language. It was actually very widening of my mind cavity. So
good. Thank you. Yeah. That's what's nice about comics, is that it's always about like more so than well, I guess you could say audio and visual would be the juxtaposition in film and TV. But in comics, it's like it's what you're reading, and then what you're reading picture wise and what you're reading words wise, using two sides of your brain at once, as opposed to TV, which is just one side of your brain. And it's fun just trying to figure out, like, you're always playing this dance, between the right side that is interested in the aesthetics of how the panels are flowing and the appeal of it, and then the left side that's like analyzing sentences and making sure it's understanding the flow, like having a good spatial, and they're working together to try to get a spatial sense of what's happening in the room and all that stuff. It's weird, but thank you. It's a challenge. We're gonna see. I'm gonna try to make it easier for people to follow. Having that said, in future books, because I think it was a little rough around the edges, but it was interesting. It was nice that Jordan Peterson did bring up Foucault, I think, or maybe it was Scruton, because Scruton likes to bring up Foucault a lot, but Peterson definitely talked about it a lot. It's just how it deprives communities of being able to ascertain competence, I think is how he said it. Like, you can't determine what's competent or not, because now everything is someone who's good at something is now suspected of a power grab, which I think was and he's good for stuff like that. He does understand, like he's able to expand stuff on a to a sociological level, but Yeah. But Scruton is funny. Like it's just weird to listen to both these guys at once in the same room, because I have to imagine that Scruton, being this Oxbridge type who can really speak in a way that most people struggle to even write and read in.
Hmm.
He can just converse at that
Right.
cognizant level. And Jordan Peterson is famous for just having these long, you know, um, monologue trains of thought that
Hmm.
that appeal very well to, I think, people nowadays who kind of want pockets of information, one after the other.
Hmm.
And I have to wonder how Scruton, what he thought of Peterson. He was probably thinking he was a very interesting person, but didn't know what to do with him the entire time.
Uh,
You know.
yeah, it seems like Peterson is like people who are fans of comics would probably relate to this idea that like the the idea of pulp fiction from its inception kind of seems to favor this idea of this episodic uh, nature of just churning out once a month, and maybe you'll strike gold kind of thing.
Hmm.
And it seems like Jordan Peterson kind of does that with his ideas, because he
Hmm.
will purposely go on a stage with a list of things, but has kind of purported that he's not finished forming the idea, in the sense
Yeah.
that like he's
Yeah.
trying to work it out on stage as you're. It's like
Yeah.
live action thinking.
Yeah. Live action thinking, and it's really an appealing. It's not. It doesn't do a disservice to people. I guess that's in an age where people were increasingly in 2014, 15, 16, when he really blew up. You know, like people really wanted a sense of honesty. I guess they wanted to see people thinking again. Smart people, like actually processing difficult things and not knowing exactly what to say,
Hmm.
but also appealing to reason and a, a sense of you know this guy's going to tell me what the past, all of civilization has been getting at,
Hmm.
but I don't have to read the books. I can just listen to him give a few talks. He's got a
Hmm.
YouTube series, like it's very appealing.
Hmm.
you know
Yeah, and I think uh, my kind of, as I kind of brought up with the Spider-Man talk last episode,
hmm.
um, the Jungian stuff really, it's interesting to me to kind of make um, different ideas into like it's almost like an enaction of a childhood, of like using action figures, and you know
Hmm.
it's like taking idea action figures and bumping them together, and
Yeah.
that kind of idea that he um, used of making um, debate something that you should be able to be civil in,
Hmm.
and not being afraid to put yourself in a room with someone that thinks differently as if you're committing some kind of violent act against them.
Hmm.
um, I
Yeah.
think it goes back to what we were talking about with the transcendent of like you're not the arbiter of what the truth is when you're having some kind of like thought process. It's kind of something that a lot of my writing is bent towards, is this idea of like your computing of information does not isolate thinking to something that only you do. And
Hmm.
it's still my struggle to think of the my ability to be sane is not dictated by the possession of all information. um, and it's
Hmm.
something that I've thought of to criticize him if there ever becomes um, enough of those cohesive thoughts to warrant a fully fleshed out essay of some kind, which is what I'm trying to gear up to do on Nigspot on a more
Oh,
regular
neat.
basis.
Yeah.
Because
Great.
the only thing that I've come across that is capable of that type of knowledge, aside from maybe Brainiac from the Superman comics, is this mathematical theory called the Laplace's demon. Um, and it's a statement where you think of how if there was a creature who was able to know where all matter is at any given time, it would be able to predict where that matter has been and where it will be. And so I find it interesting that whenever you get into a conversation with someone about the transcendent, as if it's an Aristotelian category that can be kind of put as like, this is what transcendence is. It's this obelisk that we can worship. It's putting yourself in the heart of that thing and saying, I know everything that is and will be, because that I think there's that thing that I think Lovecraft kind of goes into of like, how do you wrestle with the unknowable? Is it something that will make you megalomaniac, or is it something that will tear your brain to shreds? And that's something that's actually directly what I'm trying to deal with in White Devil. And, for those of you who are interested, it's in the description. So it's a light novel series that I'm putting out on Tapas. I actually came across in my history, just as I was uploading, that that KYRIE was, I think, where I found your stuff originally. And
used to be on Tapas.
Yeah, so that was fun seeing the kind of ruins of your civilization that were sitting there.
Ships in the night. I gotta take that down, or maybe I put it up now. I don't know. It died when I got a publisher that I no longer have. So yeah, thanks for reminding me. Yeah.
So what did you eat as you were taking a break before the show?
Oh gosh, you're gonna make me do that. Well, we had salad yesterday, and we grilled we broiled cauliflower and raisins, and put that atop the salad. And we had that yesterday, and it was pretty good. And today we're having the leftovers of that. The new salad. So that's my riveting dinner time. It's not too exciting, but it's decent. It's paleo, and it's they tell me it's healthy, so I go with it. Yeah. And I'm thinking, I'm trying to figure out what to present, because I got to give, I guess, like it's sounding like 35-45 minute talk. I offered like a 10-minute talk because I didn't understand what it was, and then she's like, no, you should probably do longer at this OPUS Inside thing. So I'm thinking, I don't know, like maybe I go into this a bit based on the sort of things you've been saying and think like, but that might be too esoteric. I know fine artists love esoteric, so this could be a great opportunity for that, but I don't know. I was also thinking, my original idea was to go into the eclectic interests that artists inevitably do have. And one of the things that separates a financially successful artist from a financially unsuccessful one is usually their ability to funnel and direct. They have the foresight to be able to direct those eclectic interests and merge them together into a like a Transformers, or like Captain Planet, all their powers combine, and then it makes like a cohesive, a singular, personable project.
Mm.
or theme, or kind of what they can be known for, that
Oh, right.
actually makes them distinctive, that can be explained in a sentence or less, that people can instantly realize and understand and comprehend and turn around in their head and consider purchasing.
Mm.
uh, I think that would be something that would be helpful, because I think a lot of people, they assume, even in school, they assume uh, the first thing is to cut out everything that doesn't already look profitable, I guess.
Mm.
That doesn't look like it's going to get you where it needs to go. But I think the key to being satisfied as an artist is to, uh, to actually not burn out in 5 years, but actually enjoy what you do. Is you got to figure out ways to, um, you got to find, like, they're all connected, because they're connected in you. You're the one person who's interested in all those things.
Mm.
So if you can find why you connect to them, like what appeals to you, you have one personality, you're one person, but it's they're all connecting in you, and
Mm.
then you can kind of project that into a personable, and it actually makes your projects more you in a way. You know what I mean? Because it's got the same constellation of ideas connected in some sort of holistic. It's like a teleology of interests that people can really get excited about. So
Yeah,
yeah,
if I could give any kind of
yeah, please.
reference for doing a talk of that length, that my uh, what would you call it? My program director at LaSalle, where I went to um, the digital arts program specifically. Um, he Conrad Kleber is his name. If anyone wants to check out any of his work, um, he kind of outlined that branding is part of you telling your client a story, and
Hmm.
I think that as someone who deals in both the language and um, the design arts, um, it's often, I think, an artist's um, chagrin to kind of form any type of diagram, like you were saying, like
Hmm.
building some kind of thing that can define for others what they do. Um,
Yeah.
but I think the same goes for making some kind of um, illustration that is spoken in any type of
Hmm.
time that you want to just kind of broaden that and tell kind of a beginning, middle, and end story to
Yeah.
illustrate what you're trying to say. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it
Don't
may not.
don't you think it's like it all art is storytelling, and if you can, I feel like whatever your project is, whether it's like, so like, I'm making comics, but part of the whole point of being able to demonstrate that you have a story worth reading, I think, is being able to successfully show someone that you can tell a story just by telling them about the things that you're interested in. I guess
Mhm.
it's almost like a the proof is in the pudding, I guess, of
Mm.
like, if you're interesting, and the way they find out that you're interesting is through a narrative framework,
Mm.
then they'll they're more likely to think that your book is interesting, I think.
Mm.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
and I think that um, it's an interesting thing that artists do to themselves to divorce their
Hmm.
abilities from themselves. Um, there's this kind of strange uh, spiritual war going on where you would like the thoughts that you want to have just kind of appear onto the paper, um,
Hmm.
and be something that works for you. Um, but it kind of gets into that mind space of the screw tape letters where it's bringing you to um, this kind of like um, accretion stupor, where
Hmm.
you're no longer helping anyone, even yourself, to kind of shrink back from this good work that you at one time were so passionate about.
Yeah. Yeah. I was watching, one of the things that I really enjoyed was watching this is like an early 90s several part documentary where some Dutch guy went over and hung out with Roger Scruton for a bit and interviewed him. And this was in more of his, I guess, intermediate or indeterminate period where he wasn't sure how he felt about many things, but he knew that in order to not be a danger to himself and others, that he had to not merely express himself in poetry and teaching and writing. I found out this. He's done a couple operas, things of that sort. Piano
Cool.
playing. He couldn't merely explore, uh, you know, the architecture of his existence merely, I guess, and even just merely express that in his creative endeavors. He had to find it. He couldn't just be intellectually satisfied. He had to be comforted. It was called The Consolation of Beauty, this series, and to be consoled requires, I guess, something transcendent that he felt that he had found in a way at the time in the early 90s. And I don't know, it seems like growing confidence in the way he expressed himself later in life, that he did find that in greater abundance, I guess.
Yeah, I forget the professor who was giving the lecture on Lewis that kind of brought me to all of this, but he was talking about that consolation. Well, he was kind of bringing up that Lewis didn't believe that the primary strengths of the soul are that it has a will and a and that it's able to rationalize, but that it's able to have that an affection, and that being something that guides you towards a better. I believe the kind of Christianese term is heart knowledge. That you are located in one area, but that does not mean that you are limited to just being a cog in a machine that's just pumping out effective things. I think in that discussion you sent me, they also talked about Bentham. I think that's another thing that Lewis also was much maligned in his writing, that idea that your utility is what defines you. And that's also going to be a major part of the White Devil series, that rather than there being some political hobby horse that I have that I'm trying to kind of exercise, it's more or less that you be defined by any kind of economy that you are effective in serving, but rather, as you're saying, kind of be consoled by the fact that you are a unique soul in which the light of God illuminates. And it's something that it seems like the artist Andrew Peterson is really kind of buzzed by that idea, that like you, rather than the Plato cave where you're just looking at shadows on the wall, it's like the minute that you accept Christ, you're just outside of the cave, and you're just soaking in the sun. And but there's this part of the cave that is specifically for you. And so as an artist, like there's this idea that your individual illumination is actually special, and that
Oh, I like that.
um, it's just I don't know how rigorous it is, but it's been funny to me to think of the turn that Plato has taken to be the descriptor of platonic, and
Hmm.
becoming this thing that like we use to kind of um, uh, talk about like relationships that are on this one level, and yet like Christ wants us to be his bride, and so the idea that we are not platonic with Christ, that he's actually chosen to have us be in this love relationship with, um,
Hmm.
kind of jazzes me in that like it's something that is you are specifically chosen, and we are not just static works of art that God has made, but people that are able to be illuminated specifically by God. Um,
Yeah. 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 It's nice. Yeah. I haven't found a worldview that handles the the carnal world and the I guess the material and the immaterial world. There's Everyone understands, all philosophies and religions understand that those two are in tension, but they don't know how to resolve it without picking one over the other. I think in different ways,
mm.
or finding some way to like play them against each other as chess pieces.
I think maybe in some future episode we should talk about
Yeah.
the Randy Alcorn's Heaven,
Hmm.
because it's been very interesting to see how that's affected my um, views on fantasy, um, because it seems to me that a lot of Lewis and Tolkien's um, representation of like God taking the world and making it new, um, are kind of flew in the face of my preconceptions of what, you know, as you're saying, is something that we tend to draw dichotomies that maybe are not there, um,
Hmm.
and making uh, dualism kind of supersede the truths that Scripture brings to light,
Yeah.
um, and ways in which you know there are carnal aspects of that we had written off as maybe more natural, and what comes to mind is the whole idea of eros, where um, within Greek culture
Yeah.
there were certain um, perversions that were delighted in, and then um, you have some things like women being subjugated because of what they elicit within the male philosophical populace,
Yeah.
and it was something that was so kind of like um, it seemed to really destroy uh, some of their ability to appreciate what love is. Um,
Yeah.
and so that it kind of broke my mind a little bit to read the Heaven book, and I'd
Yeah.
appreciate an opportunity to pick up the pieces
Yeah.
at some point.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe we do that for next episode. That'll be fun.
Mm.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we're at 8:05. We managed to drive through straight through to an hour,
Haha.
thankfully, and we did. I think we did a really good job kind of summarizing. At least I hope a bit of that video. And where was that video? I'm gonna take. Well, I'll put that. I'll put it in the show notes. I'll put it in the show notes so then
Awesome.
we people can know what the heck we're talking about. Yes. So I guess that's another episode of StriderTalk. So
All right. It was
um,
good for me.
yeah, yeah, it was fantastic for me. So yeah, thanks, John, and thanks for anyone who checks this out later. We'll be doing this for the foreseeable future. It looks like every week. and I think we're both having fun chatting about this. It's really something I'm looking forward to.
Oh, same here.
Like a brain cleanser,
Hmm.
fresher upper.
Yeah, Lord knows we all need some brain bleach.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's that's another episode. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, this has been another episode, and so thanks for checking out Strider Talk. Please give us a like, give us a subscribe, and we'll catch you later.
Bye
Thanks.
bye.
See ya.